I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the August 19th, 2024 Board of Ed meeting for Hunterdon Central Regional High School. I'd like to ask Ms. Stokes to do a roll call, please.
Ms. Bletfield?
Here.
Mrs. Duggan?
Oh, here.
Ms. Gong?
Here.
Ms. Kellogg?
Here.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Here.
Mrs. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Reimer? Here. And Mrs. Santangelo.
Here.
Okay, great. So what we're doing today is something a little bit different than normal. We're going to be convening to go to an executive session to interview two candidates that have expressed interest in the Delaware Township vacancy. So we'll do that now, and then we will come back and start the meeting after that in about an hour or so. So I'd like a motion to convene into executive session.
So moved. Second.
Second, motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? All right, so let's move on over. Thanks.
How are you?
Good. How are you? Yeah.
I do have a couple things to talk about in,
You know, before you do executive session, we're going to pull Jess's vote out.
yeah, she said. I like that.
Hi, how are you? Thank you again.
Hello, Sandra.
What do you think?
Short timer. Conflicted, little conflicted, because I met a lot of really, really nice people. I think we're putting together a very nice administrative team.
Yeah, maybe I can just do it after executive.
Informative.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
The information person. Going to learn what you guys want and need. And,
He knows, yeah.
but she is cranking out a lot of stuff. But you're in good hands. I mean, really good hands. Good decision. Oh, yes. Yes. And I told her, I'm just as close as speed dial. Can you believe
Yeah, love it.
I wasn't even done,
Excellent.
and school systems are already calling me up. And I say, no, no, no. And not this time.
I feel like I got like the plague over here. I'm like, you know what? I might sit here and put my papers right here. This way I can spread to the
Sure,
right.
there's an
I want
empty
my
seat.
paper here. I want my paper right here, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
Not at all. This is yours.
That's ridiculous. I don't want that.
I worked for a principal one time, and in order for her to get order, she had very long fingernails, and she would crank up the speaker real high, and she would do this
Oh,
with the tap. Ooh.
oh, yeah, that's crazy. Okay. Okay, hello there. Sorry, I spread out a little bit on my side here.
And I spoke with Alicia today. You want to handle the public comments if they want to talk about JTC and the transportation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We don't talk about it.
right. We can just make a statement that we're focused on safety and we share the
We are
same
moving.
concerns.
We're moving forward. The kids will have buses, and we're working out the final details.
Yeah, okay. All right. All right, you guys ready? Yeah. Okay, I'd like to make a motion to reconvene into open session.
Second.
Okay. Welcome to a meeting of the Hunterdon Central Regional High School Board of Education. Please be advised that this and all meetings of the board are open to the public and media consistent with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4.6, 4-6, and that advance notice required therein has been provided. Meeting notice was also published in the boardroom of the Upper School campus, sent to the Courier News, Star Ledger, Express Times, and the Hunterdon County Democrat, and sent to the clerks of Delaware Township, East Amwell Township, Flemington Borough, Raritan Township, and Reddington Township. The public will have an opportunity to be heard as shown on the agenda. Ms. Stokes, can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Bletfield?
Here.
Ms. Gong?
Here.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Here.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Here.
Mrs. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Reimer?
Here.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Here.
And Mrs. Duggan.
Here. Okay, can we rise for the flag salute, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Mr. Reimer, if you could read the district mission statement, please?
Sure. Hunterdon Central is an innovative educational community dedicated to the intellectual, social, and emotional safety and growth of all students. While fostering curiosity and promoting wellness, we aspire to create powerful learning experiences, establish strong partnerships, and serve as contributing members of society.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to start by motion to approve the minutes from the July 20th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Butfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Gong? Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Duggan.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to also make a motion to approve the minutes from the July 22nd meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Sorry, I forgot to ask that before. Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Butfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Duggan.
Yes.
Okay, all yes, motion carries.
Okay, we did not have any correspondence for this month. We can move through that.
I hate to interrupt, but we actually did, and I did forward it. It's just not on the agenda. I just don't want anyone who corresponded to feel like it
Okay.
wasn't.
I did talk to Heather about that, and we were kind of trying to figure out if it was board correspondence or the way it came in, if it was appropriate to put it on. She said that she would look at it through, like, if it was board correspondence or not, but we can share that with the board after this. Thank you. Okay, so before we move into the interim superintendent report, what I would like to do is make a motion to take an agenda out of order and move item number 3 under personnel to the front of this meeting. So I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Butfield to talk about that. Oh,
Should I
actually, we need to
second?
do
I'll
the
second
motion. You're going to second. Sorry, guys, we're rolling here, trying to figure this out. Motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Okay. Can we have a roll call, please, on that?
Mrs. Butfield?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Duggan.
Yes. Okay, Mrs. Butfield.
Okay, so
All yes, motion carries.
the item that we are moving is the appointment of our next superintendent, Ms. Cangelosi Haight. And just in case there's anyone who is not familiar with her, anyone who's maybe watching on the video, Ms. Cangelosi Haight has been in the educational field for nearly 20 years, has been with our district for 5 years, first as the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and most recently as the Assistant Superintendent. Many of you have probably seen her do board presentations. She's done many over the years. During her time here, she has also made many, many valuable contributions to the district. I could never go through all of them, but just to give you a sense, she has significantly increased the dual enrollment partnership agreements. She's expanded our magnet programs, developed and led the district's Emerging Leaders program for current staff members, and most recently helped Central's ranking become the number 14 high school in the state, number 2 if you just look at the comprehensive non-competitive admissions high schools. Ms. Cangelosi Haight is very collaborative, works well with the board. She's very creative, well-respected, a visionary leader. And as you know, we used a search consultant, HYA. We spent the last several months doing a very extensive search. I'd like to thank everyone for your patience with that process and also for your participation and input. It really helped us develop the desired characteristics that we were looking for in our new superintendent. And the board is confident that Ms. Cangelosi-Hade meets the criteria of what the community is looking for and is the best fit for our district moving forward. We are also confident that under her leadership, the school will be driven to many more significant achievements in the future. So I would like to move the approval of the appointment of Ms. Jessica Cangelosi-Hade as the superintendent for Hunterdon Central Regional High School, effective Saturday, August 24th, this Saturday, 2024, through June 30th, 2028.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I hope, we did cast a really wide net on this search, and we really did come out with the best candidate. I have to thank Dr. Shadow, because since April, I've really had an opportunity to get to know and work with Ms. Cangelosi-Hade, because I never really had the opportunity before. And I can tell you that I found her to be extremely knowledgeable and inquisitive, transparent, responsive, and collaborative, and I think that those are these traits that are going to really drive Central into the future. And so, I hope also, I think the timing couldn't have been better, that we have the new leadership going into a new school year, that hopefully everyone can take a deep sigh of, relief, knowing the decision and knowing what's going to happen, and hopefully get into a settled school year this year and really have an excellent start. So really think that we're headed in a great direction. Yeah, again, I just want to echo, how extensive this process has been, and how impressive all the candidates were, and how exciting Central was as an opportunity for so many people. And we could not, I can't even begin to tell you the vision that you showed, and everything that you brought to the table makes me so excited to work with you going forward. So I'm excited for the school year. So thank you.
Ditto.
Something just happened. All right, so then let's move to a roll call, please. Get this official.
Mrs. Bletfield,
Yes.
Ms. Gong,
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell,
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Reimer,
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo,
Yes.
and Mrs. Duggan.
Absolutely, yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Congratulations, Jessica. Okay, so that's a very exciting news for us. So with that, then, what I'd like to do is have us move to the superintendent report. So Dr. Shadow, if you want
Thank
to
you.
take it.
Thank you. There were no HIBs. That's a good thing.
Be a problem.
There was one suspension of a student from a credit restoration program. It's found in the lavatory with, they were found in the lavatory with a vape pipe, a THC cartridge, and that's a violation of the drug rule. So that 3-day suspension will be carried out starting on the first day of school. And the student was seen by a doctor and will be returned after the 3 days. Next on the agenda, well, let me go over a few things. New staff orientation begins tomorrow, August 20th through the 22nd, and every day has a theme. The theme for day one is orientation to Hunterdon Central, our values, mission, and a safe and inclusive community. Day two, instructional priorities. And day three, preparing for a successful start and the kind of district supports for students and teachers. It's well planned out. Ms. Cangelosi Haid and the team did a nice job putting this together. Also, student orientation information was sent out to the class of 2028, new students in 10th through 12th grades, parents and students and guardians. Also, school information is being sent to all returning 10th through 12th grade students, parents, and guardians this week by their unit offices. School starts September 5th at 7:35 in the morning. Our custodial team is finishing up their summer preparation work in all areas of our facilities for a smooth opening of school. And finally, our fall athletic teams are in full practice, as well as the marching band, as you heard coming in, for their opening games of the 2024-25 season. And that concludes my part of the introductory information. And now I will introduce our new superintendent, who is going to give us a report on the 2024 Spring NJGPA results report.
Okay, good evening. Are we on? We're good now? Yes? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. You know, I'm Jessica Cangelosi-Haid, and Ms. Butfield, you mentioned that I do presentations, and so this will be the final one probably that I do on assessment results. So as you all know, we give a variety of assessments throughout the school year. There are two that we give in the spring that we're required to report on within a certain time frame, and that's the NJGPA, which is the New Jersey Graduation Proficiency Assessment, as well as the Access Test, and that's one of our assessments we use for a multilingual learner. So Dr. Arizondo and I are here tonight to present to you the results on this. So first, we'll start with the NJGPA, which again is short for New Jersey Graduation Proficiency Assessment. And I wanted to start by giving you an overview of that assessment because it is a newer assessment. It was adopted by the Department of Education as a graduation requirement in September of 2021. This is a graduation requirement that students in grade 11 take. And this is different because this was a move away from course-specific assessments that students used to take, known as the NJSLA, the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment. Prior to the NJGPA, students used to take an assessment at the end of every course in grades 9, 10, and at one point 11. And so that was English 9, English 10, English 11, and then typically Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. Now, we still do have the NJSLA, and those results will be reported to you in probably about 2 months, but that's not the primary graduation pathway anymore. The NJGPA is. So this is a graduation requirement for students in the classes of 2023 to 2025. So the students who took it this past spring are going into their senior year. They're the class of 2025. The NJGPA is designed to align to the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. It measures readiness based on grades 9 and 10 ELA standards, and math is based on Algebra 1 and Geometry. And it's important to keep that math piece in mind because I will talk about it in a little bit. Unlike the NJSLA, you'll recall there are 5 proficiency levels with the NJSLA. With the NJGPA, there's only 2 performance levels. There's graduation ready and not yet graduation ready. And I always like to say I disagree with these terms because I think telling students and their families that they're not yet graduation ready is a little jarring, especially based on one assessment. But that is the terms we are given, and that's what we have to report out on. So I'll now go through the results with you. So for this spring of 2024, we saw in math, and we tested about 580 students, just so you have a sense of how many students were tested. We saw graduation readiness in 73% of the students in math and 91% in our English language arts. So I do want to note the disparity there. That's something that we've seen last year, so you probably recall that from last year. But this is not something specific just to our district. This is something that all districts are seeing, this disparity between math and ELA, with math usually being lower. Now, one thing that I do want to point out is the comparison to the state. So we are actually 9% higher than the state in ELA, but we're 18% higher than the state in math. So that just gives you a little comparison, and just to look at not just the 73% that I know it is a further point away from 91%. We do also have to look at demographic comparisons, so I'll take you through some of those student groups that we look at. So first we're going to look at male and female, and you'll see in math there's a 6% difference between females and males, and in ELA a 9% difference. And you will recall Mr. McIsaac, our English supervisor, speaking about that gender gap that they have been noticing as well. So they're continuing to work on closing that gap between the males and the females, specifically by looking at things like choice to further engage males in literature and things like that within the English class. We'll also look at race and ethnicity, another area that we're required to report on. So you'll see disparities here, especially with our Black and African American students, as well as our Hispanic and Latino students. One thing I do want to note, there was an increase this year for our Hispanic and Latino students in math. It went from 33% last year to 49% graduation ready this year. So that's a pretty big increase. There was also a 9% increase for our Black and African American students. One of the things I like to point out in our smaller student groups, like our Black and African American students, it's really difficult to do a percentage comparison because that represents about 25 students. So each student represents a large percentage, 4% of the overall group. So sometimes it's difficult to really report on if there is an overall growth or decrease or not. And then we also look at students by program. So this is students who are traditionally at risk, more traditionally at risk. So you will see some disparities from those more traditionally at-risk students. They're economically disadvantaged students, are multilingual learners, and then students with IEPs as well as students with 504 plans. I do want to note that our students with IEPs showed increases from the previous year, as did our multilingual learners in math. However, you do still see, compared to the 73% in math of the general population and 91% in ELA of the general population, they are still further behind. So I'll talk to you in just a short while about things we're doing to remediate for that. And then lastly, I wanted to give you a longitudinal comparison, but that's quite difficult with this assessment because it's a newer assessment. So I'm bringing us back to 2017, where we had our PARC assessment. You might recall PARC was aligned with Common Core. That was prior to the NJSLA, and that was the graduation requirement. So if you look just at the overall scores and achievement, we are seeing a growth. But again, it's hard because it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. So I also wanted to put this up here because it shows you kind of the state of assessment and standardized assessment in New Jersey. There have been, just since 2017, 3 different graduation assessment requirements, which is difficult for students in high school. It's difficult for teachers as well, because we do like to look at the assessments to see how well our curriculum aligns. But if the assessment is continually changing, that makes it a little bit difficult in terms of us then realigning our curriculum. So one thing that I did think was important for you all to know is that the state has been talking about changing the graduation assessment again. And so we have not yet received any dates for the spring of 2025 NJGPA. So we don't know what that means. We don't know if that means there will be a GPA or if it will be a different assessment. The state has also not released graduation assessment requirements for the class of 2026, which is this year's juniors, this coming year's juniors. So that NJGPA was only in effect for students in the class of 2023 through 2025. So as we get more information, I will continue to share it with you, but I do want to point out kind of the overall testing landscape that we're in the state of New Jersey. And lastly, I wanted to just do some takeaways with you, some successes, as well as interventions that we're doing as a result of these test results. So I did note our growth in some of those subgroups, a little growth in proficiency and achievement. We do specifically look at subgroups, and we also look even further down. We look at courses, we look at sections, we look at all that, just we don't publicly present that data. What we really like to look at, which you do not see here, is individual standards and skills. So we do receive that information from the testing to see what specific skills, maybe there's skills that are missing, maybe there's skills that are overemphasized in the tests that aren't in our curriculum. We look at all of that. One of the most important things that we do is we use this NJGPA data not alone. We use it with other assessment data and just with other data in general. So looking at it in comparison to PSAT, looking at it with our Linkit benchmarks, our regular course benchmarks, our common assessments. And that's how we're really identifying students through those multiple data points. Who needs the extra support? Who needs interventions? I did want to point out before I talk about those supports and interventions specifically, there are additional graduation assessment pathways. And this is really important for families to know, especially if they receive the letter that says their child is not yet graduation ready. That just means that they haven't met the first pathway. The second pathway is through PSAT, SAT, or ACT, or AccuPlacer scores. And just to give you a comparison for last year, since our results were similar to last year for English Language Arts, we had 18 students meet, okay, we're just gonna keep pushing ahead. We had 18 students meet the graduation requirement through the secondary pathway, through the SAT or the AccuPlacer. In math, we had 70 students meet the graduation requirement through the SAT and PSAT. And I do want us to think for a second what that means, that students were deemed college ready by the College Board, but they weren't graduation ready as it pertains to the NJDOE. So that's something we need to grapple with, but it's something that is a reality. So it is good that we have the secondary pathways. There is also a third pathway, which is the portfolio, and that consists of students doing mini projects on specific skills that we target. And that's used as the third pathway. They do that during their senior year typically. So last year, for this class of 2024, we had 35 students do that for English and 99 for math. That is certainly higher than it used to be when we had PARC and NJSLA. But again, it still is good that we have that as an option. So just, again, to talk a little bit more in detail about the interventions, we do have a multi-tiered system of supports here. And what that means is at Tier 1, these are supports that teachers do in the classroom every day that they're just looking at, I see you need a little help with this skill. Why don't you come to the side and we'll work on it. Those are things they can manage in the classroom. But sometimes, and through multiple means of assessment, not just the NJGPA, students may need additional support. So we have what's called response to intervention, or RTI. That's a Tier 2 support. So that's a little more intensive of an intervention, a little more frequent, and we use different data to see how long they need to stay within that intervention. So in math, we're using IXL. In ELA, we use questions from Common Lit and other targeted practice materials. Very rarely then do students have to move to Tier 3, which is even more intensive interventions or possibly a change in their placement. But just so you know, we are doing this. We're doing this regularly. There's a whole system. There's a whole measurement tool that we use and a reporting tool that we use to make sure that we're not letting anyone slip through the cracks. We also have tutorials, which are Block 5, as you know. In the spring, we even go into after hours and evenings as well. And then we have a targeted summer program for students who do not pass the NJGPA. We do a lot of work in our department, so looking at common assessments and then looking at what the gaps could be. And what that means is we're looking at data from the evidence statement. So I did write some examples down. So like in English Language Arts through this NJGPA, we see that analysis of complex characters in literature was one of the proficiencies that scored a little bit lower. So what that means is how can we put that into class? How can we target that in class since we see that a little bit lower here? But we see that citing information from a text and comparing the point of view from 2 or more authors had strong proficiency. So those are things we know that we're doing well. And then in math, we see geometric theorems and reasoning as lower areas of proficiency. But then on the flip side, we saw reasoning with equations, as well as factoring polynomials as higher proficiencies. If you recall, when I started this presentation, I asked you to remember that the math assessment was based on Algebra 1 and geometry. That is slightly problematic because we have students taking this assessment who are in geometry. And so when you look at the data of the students who are in geometry, because they take this in March and they haven't completed their whole geometry course, most, I would say the majority of them, about 2/3, are not passing the NJGPA. So that's something, we don't want to speed up their geometry in the junior year, but it's something we need to be aware of, to say, what can we do to help them if this stays in place, to help them with the NJGPA so they can meet their graduation requirements. But remember, we do have the secondary and third pathways as well. And then lastly, one of the things that I wanted to point out is in the scoring of the NJGPA, we saw in math 70 of the 157 students, so almost half of them, just missed it by 1 or 2 questions. And that's heartbreaking. So we do retest in the fall. And so those students will have another opportunity to retest in the fall. And we do some tutoring before then to be able to test before the fall. We do share this data. I mentioned vertical articulation. We do share this data with our K-8 districts. They go into depth with it to look at sometimes student by student in our smaller districts. So all of this to say, we do pay attention to the test even though we don't necessarily agree with it as a primary method for determining graduation readiness. We still pay attention to it. We still use it as a data point. And we do have some successes, as you saw. So that is my part. I'll pause now if there's questions, and then we can move on to the access testing. If there's any questions, I could take them now. Go ahead, Mrs. Kellogg.
So I know that there are other schools within Hunterdon County that do Algebra 1, Geometry, and then Algebra 2. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if they're going to rejigger the test again for 2026, but is there a reason that we prioritize we do Algebra 2 and then Geometry?
Not everybody does. The sequence is a little different depending on, so this plays into a good question about us being a regional high school district. So we have different pathways depending on what school you come from. So some students do geometry first. Some students who come in more at the honors level end up doing Algebra 2 before the geometry. So it really just depends. But it's a good question, and it's one we've been talking about too. Should we move to having the geometry for everybody before Algebra 2? Go ahead, Mrs. O'Donnell.
Thank you for all of this. I was trying to understand a little bit more about the difference between the students with IEPs and the ones with 504 plans. So IEPs, they showed more improvement than those with 504.
Yes, so that was interesting. I'm glad you picked up on that. Yes, so the students with IEPs did show a bigger increase in their graduation readiness this year than the students with 504 plans. It's hard to say, right? Those are two different, it's class of 2024 and then class of 2023. You're comparing apples to oranges almost. But yes, they did see a greater increase. And we don't know why that is. I can't tell you why. All I can tell you is we do with both of those groups. They both get the RTI, the interventions, that kind of thing.
Yes, the different graduating classes, I can see that would definitely affect it. And just the delivery, I think, of services. Those are two very different supports, an IEP and a 504 plan. So it just makes me think a little bit more about what the 504 kids might need.
Yeah. Well, and even with IEPs, the support is different, right? That's also a wide spectrum of needs and support. So there are students with IEPs that aren't in class support sections. They don't need that. So that's why that particular group is hard to look at, because it is such a wide range and varying needs within that subgroup. Yeah. Go ahead.
So can you talk a little bit more about the articulation with the K-8s? I know that we've got a lot of data now, and I think we're doing really interesting things working with them.
Yep. So I can give you, math does an amazing job with their articulation. And I think actually, Mrs. Santangelo and Mrs. Gong, when you did your orientation, I was talking to you a little bit about what the math department does. But they look at all that data. They also look at placement data to see Did the students stay where they were placed? How are they doing in terms of what course level they were placed in? Did they drop off after time? They literally look at every individual student, and then they go and look at curriculum to see how does that play into the curriculum? Are the students well prepared? Is there a specific subgroup of students that, we're noticing are struggling, or they're missing a specific skill? What we would love to do moving forward, but it's a little difficult in terms of data sharing, is being able to, so the K-8 districts have all this data. They have all this information on students from when they were 5 years old, essentially. And we don't get that when they come to us. It's almost like the kids start over. And there's something to be said about a fresh start, but there was also something to be said about having some historical data for the students, for our teachers to look at, for our intervention specialists within English and math to look at as well. So that would be our next step, is figuring out how can we get that data from our sending districts. Good. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I will pass it over to Dr. Arredondo now, who will talk about our spring access results.
Hello. Can you hear me? I guess I need to move this down a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you about the access results. In general, the access for ELS 2.0 is the complete name of the test. This is given every year in the spring. The state's window is very wide. We try to do it so it ends about 2 weeks before spring break, which means we give it at the end of February, beginning of March. And it's a test of English language proficiency. It's also it's aligned with the WIDA standards, which is the professional standards for the teaching of English as a second language. It's also required by the Department of Education, and it measures content-based academic language, not social language. So it measures how well students are prepared to be mainstreamed into regular English language instruction. Scores range from 1 to 6. Students must achieve a score of 4.5 to be considered for exit. Then we look at multiple criteria. I should also mention, I don't have this on the list, that the state acknowledges that students in earlier grades make greater proficiency gains than older students in later grades. And also another factor that affects their growth in English language proficiency and their scores on the access is their literacy level in their first language, or any language, as literacy is a transferable skill. Multilingual students are also required to take the NJGPA. I should also mention that multilingual students are what we now call English language learners. They used to be called ELS. The access is still called the Access for ELS 2.0, but in the state of New Jersey and in many other states, they're referred to as MLs. I also want to mention that while the state recognizes the importance of literacy as a factor in English language proficiency growth, there is no required first language literacy test. And this district, a couple years ago, the board supported we use a Spanish language literacy test, and that really helps us with collecting data on students and understanding what the English language proficiency growth means. So as you can see here, and this is a little bit of a tricky measure because this is our average proficiency growth. Students K through 12 are expected to increase their proficiency growth by 0.5 out of this 1 to 6 measure. Now, in order to see a proficiency growth, a student has to have taken the access for at least 2 years. So that's a little bit tricky because we do have in any given year, you'll notice that in 2024, we had about, I don't know if you can see it from this chart, but there were about 60 students that we were comparing when the total number of multilingual learners was over 100. So this average proficiency growth at any time just represents the number of students who have been in the program long enough to take the test 2 years in a row or more. So in 2021, our average proficiency growth of this group of students was nearly the 0.5, which was great. We declined the 2 years after that, and then this past year, I think we've begun to see a little recovery. And we had, in 2024, 39% of students made the average proficiency growth rate. Oh, excuse me, this is our average proficiency growth, not the average proficiency growth rate. So our average proficiency growth this last year was 0.39, which is approaching 0.5, much more so than the past prior 2 years, 2023 and 2022. So moving on, this is actually what I was talking about. Excuse me, I was showing you the wrong graphic. So this is the English proficiency growth goal of students who have been in the program 2 years or more. And you'll notice we have no data from 2020 because that was the year of the pandemic and testing requirements were suspended for that spring. So in 2024, we have 39% of these students meeting the growth score. In 2023, we had this relatively the same number of students meeting the growth score, but the overall number of students available in that sample was larger. Therefore, in 2024, we had a greater percentage of students meeting that growth score. So as I mentioned before, literacy levels are not required by the state, but these are very important in understanding proficiency growth. And we use these levels given to us by the American Reading Company. They use a system which they call the ANEAL, and it's based on colors. The students are quite invested in this. They're very aware of whether they're at the rojo, which is red, or the blanco. They get very excited when they move a level. And you can see we did have, most students did make the expected gain of 1 grade level. We do have students who achieve more than 1 grade level in growth. Those are generally students who start at a lower literacy level. And our takeaways for the access are, first of all, well, we're happy that our English language proficiency growth goal has increased. And we need to keep in mind that we have a very small sample size here. Our total ML population is about 100 students. When I started here 8 years ago, it was about 40 students. This has been, there was a big influx. Then for a couple of years, it was a smaller influx, but still, that's a really small sample size compared to other districts in the state that have 500, 1,000 or more multilingual learners. In addition to this, we have a great diversity of population. We have many students. Most of our students, I would say about half of them, start their U.S. education here in 9th grade. And most of our students do experience interrupted schooling at some point in their home regions. So these are normally students that are starting at a below grade level literacy rate. And so since we know that that is, research has borne out that that's related to English, connected to English language proficiency, that's something that's really important to us. And that's why some years ago we did start our bilingual language arts program. We do have a documented growth in literacy. 79% of students show growth of at least 1 grade level, which is great. We do have, in areas of focus, we do have a lot of chronic absenteeism and withdrawals in our multilingual population. This has certainly improved a lot. So given that our documented growth in literacy is nearly 80%, even considering those factors, is very good. I think one of our goals is to focus on these 2 areas in the upcoming years. And I think another good goal that we have is, now that we've had several years of our bilingual language arts program, we can, using our tools of Genesis, our new student information system, and linking it with Elevation, which is our student information system for multilingual learners, and link it. We have enough years of data now to really see if the gains in literacy are connected and correlated with these increased gains in the access scores. But definitely, we are going to continue to focus on English language proficiency growth. Obviously, students being present in school is a very important factor in that, so we really need to concentrate on that. Questions? Yes.
Yes,
Is there time?
when you were talking about students needing to be in school. It works, I just wasn't sure if I needed it. I will.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know, I know sometimes with students, work will be sent, brought to a student's home if they're having sort of an extended difficulty, that certain accommodations are made, and I wonder if with the multilingual learners, if that's something that happens or that's helpful.
Sure. I mean, we have the same rules that we do for multilingual learners as for other learners. And if, there's documented reasons for their absenteeism, and if the counselors can determine why, and, they get at-home instruction like all students are entitled to. We do have a little bit of I would say, a digital barrier with this population. They're difficult to reach by email. Many of them do not have access to Wi-Fi in their homes, which makes some communications and delivery of instruction more difficult. So those are things that we would like to focus on and see exactly, how is this affecting them, and why is it creating this? And I do think that, as we know, they do take the NJGPA, and Jessica didn't mention this, but a big percentage of our portfolio students are multilingual students. And while that is disheartening in one sense, I personally find it very heartening because more and more of our multilingual students are graduating. It may be through this other pathway, but they are graduating and they are committed to remaining in school. So I think we just need to focus on it. But absolutely, the students get all the benefits that all students do when they're absent from school for a period of time. Other questions? Okay. Should I close this? Okay, that's fine. It's public comment.
Okay, thank you to you both for the presentations that you gave tonight. So now we're going to move on to the first residents forum for items on the agenda. If anybody would like to speak, you'd have 5 minutes. You can come to the podium. Okay, seeing none, we will move into our organizational items. We have 5 items under organizational items. The first one is to move to approve the following resolution. Mr. Kane Fowler, whereas your personal commitment to quality education, your valued participation in establishing effective policies, and your readiness to render services in seeking educational excellence has contributed immeasurably to the progress of our school system. Be it resolved that on behalf of your colleagues, teachers, and students, we thank you for your dedication, your service, and we wish you good health and happiness in your years to come. Board of Education member from 2021 to 2024, serving as board president 2024, 2021, 2022, operations and transportation member, joint transportation committee member, Hunterdon County Polytech liaison, 2022, 2023, operations and transportation chairperson, joint transportation committee member, student life program member, and Hunterdon Central Regional High School technology steering committee liaison. 2023, 2024, serving as board president, HCAA negotiations as an ad hoc member, and student discipline also as an ad hoc member. So thank you, Mr. Fowler, if you're watching. Hope you're enjoying Florida. The second item is to adopt the curricula, move to adopt all courses and curricula for the 2024-2025 school year, including the following new courses on file in the Office of the Superintendent. There are 2 new social studies classes listed and 1 new course for technology, engineering, and design. The third item is adopting textbooks. Move to adopt all textbooks for courses for the 2024-2025 school year on file in the Office of the Superintendent. The fourth is move to approve the following officials for the 2024-25 school year or until superseded by another. This is for a compliance officer. And the fifth item is move to approve the revision of the following checking account signatures to include the board vice president per policy 0171, retroactive to August 1st, 2024. The vice president shall assume and discharge the duties of the president in the president's absence, disability, or disqualification, NJSA 18A 16.1.1, including signing all warrants and certifying all payrolls. So with that, I would like to move items 1 through 5.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, if we could have a roll call, please.
Mrs. Bletfield?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes,
All yes, motion carries.
thank you. Okay, Mr. Reimer, do you have the updates for Student Life and Program?
Thank you. We have 3 items tonight. The first is for tuition and transportation for our special education program. The second is for a student registering from Warren Hills Regional High School District for the 24-25 Project Trust program. That 10th grader will have an estimated tuition of $39,000 and will start on the first day of school, September 5th. And the third is for the McKinney-Vento Education of Homeless Children and Youth Program, general intent to collaborate. I'd like to move those 3 items.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, on item 2, can you explain what that program is?
Essentially, it's a one student coming over from Warren Hills Regional High School.
I just wasn't sure what the Project Trust program was. And that might be a.
Yeah, Jessica, do we have any insight on that?
It's a self-contained special education program that focuses a lot on social and emotional components as well. So they do a lot of restorative circles and restorative practices.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Bletfield?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll take us through the Operations and Transportation Committee. So the first 3 items are our monthly, the financial reports ending in June 30th, 2024. We have our invoices and our transfers. We have a donation of office furniture, so we would like to thank Patty Yapel. She has donated some office furniture in the value of $2,200, and from what I understand, it's already being beautifully displayed in the executive suites and being enjoyed, so thank you. We have a donation of a clarinet from Susan Nerger, Ye Old Antique and Curiosity Shop for our music department. The value of the clarinet is $900. Number 6 is a Schiff Wellness Grant. Move to accept the 2024-2025 School Health Insurance Fund Wellness Grant in an amount of $13,850 to provide all staff members the opportunity for health and wellness activities. Number 7, we have 121 students that are enrolling in the Hunterdon County Polytech. So we have some tuition that we need to pay in about $618,000. The 8th item is for Hunterdon County VOTEC. So these are the tech programs that Hunterdon County offers, the animal science, biomedical, computer science, and environmental. We have 136 students attending these programs at just under about $10,000 a student, which is just under about just over $1.3 million of tuition expense for those programs from the district. Number 9 is for some transportation routes, and you'll notice that there's a lot of blanks here. What we are going to do is vote on the one route that's been bid on from Craft. It's item B there. You'll see the other routes are still out to bid, and we're working to get those covered. But we're voting on that one. Number 11, East Amwell Township jointure. So this is for the bus routes for East Amwell Township. I'm sorry, number 11 is the Delaware Township jointure, which has our bus routes listed there. There's 2 routes. And number 12 is move to approve professional service providers. 1, Barry Consulting and Training for transportation consulting, and then James Shoup for purchase consulting services. So with that, I'd like to move items 1 through 12 under operations and transportation. Have a second?
Second.
Any questions on that?
Just one question. How has the census that we're sending to Polytech changed since last year?
The census?
The number of students? Like, has it gone up? Has it gone down?
I think I heard it's about the same. It's pretty close to flat year on year.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Can we have roll call, please?
Mrs. Bletfield?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, so Mrs. Bletfield, would you like to go over the personnel?
We have another 28 motions in addition to the one we already did. 3.1, we have 2 retirements, science teacher Louis Gatto and technician Kevin Searles. Both have over 30 years with the district, so I'd like to thank them for all of their contributions to the district and wish them well in retirement. We have some resignations in 3.2. You'll see a couple within the operations and transportation departments. And you'll also see the resignation of our interim superintendent, Dr. Shadow, whose last day is this Friday. I'd like to thank you for helping us out over the last few months, and I wish you well as you go back into retirement. 3.4, we have contractual salary appointments. You'll see some internal movement within the operations and transportation departments. You'll also see a world language teacher hire, which has completed the last of our open general education teacher positions, so we are now in really good shape as we start the school year. We have number 5, contractual hourly appointments, and then we have our hourly appointments in 3.6, which is mostly the HCTV student technicians. We also have a work-based learning program development appointment there. We have 2 substitutes in 3.7. 3.8, we have the appointment of the ABLE program development positions, which is grant-funded. 3.9, we have an appointment for the ASPIRE program development position. 10 through 18, I'm just going to go through really fast. It's just various other appointments. We have athletic event workers, chaperones, AM, PM supervision, PM security, home instructors, SAT course instructors, substitute bus drivers, substitute custodians, and substitute teachers. Then in 19, you'll see we are reinstating the position of Director of Curriculum and Instruction. In 20, we have our unpaid co-curricular advisors and volunteers, which are for robotics and color guard. 21, we have professional development. 22 are professional development workshop instructors. The staff members being approved will will create 4-session workshop series centered around topics that align to the district goals and professional development plan. These workshops are a little bit different than what we've done in the past. They'll be delivered during the school day throughout the year and will also be recorded and posted so that they're available to all the staff. In 23, you'll see the professional development attendees for August 29th. 24, we are approving a stipend for the Wellness Challenge and Grant Coordinator with grant money. We did the same thing last year. 25, we have new staff induction buddy stipends, which is also grant funded. This is additional supports that we put in place for new staff beyond what the state mandates for novice teachers. And what we do here is the district assigns buddies to all new certificated staff in the HCEA, regardless of how long they have been teaching or working in the education sector. 26, we are rescinding 2 appointments. 27, we have some leaves of absences. 28, we have a settlement agreement. And then finally, 29 is just 2 amendments. There were some stipends that were accidentally reversed on a previous agenda. So with that, I will move personnel items 1, 2, and then 4 through 29.
Second.
Okay. Any questions? Any discussion? Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Butfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer?
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the policy committee. Mrs. Peterson?
All right, we have a much more reasonable first read this month. We only have 6 items for first read to adopt under L1. The first one is policy 2415.05. This is a January 2022 update for student surveys, analysis, and evaluations. This is a mandated policy. Policy 2415.06, January 2019 update, also mandatory, mandated by our Strauss-Esme, our policy vendor, and this is unsafe school choice option. Policy 2461 is an April 2022 update for special education receiving schools, another mandated. Policy 4219 from April 2019 is a commercial driver's license controlled substance and alcohol use testing update. And policy 5561 from the July 2018 updates, use of physical restraints and seclusion techniques for students with disabilities. These are all updating policies that are already on. This is a policy that's already on our current books. The name, I think, kind of catches some people off guard. It's a little alarming if you first read it. We encourage you to read the policy and know that our staff are highly trained in de-escalation techniques, and physical restraint is used only in an emergency when students are exhibiting behavior that places themselves or others in immediate physical danger. So, that's been on our books for quite a while. This is just an update. And then we have Regulation 5600, which is an annual update to our Student Code of Conduct, Student Discipline Regulation. And so those are the bylaws that we are adopting on first read tonight. You'll notice some of our policies that we're updating. You'll hear things like 2019, 2022 updates. Hopefully, as we go along a little farther in here, you will only hear this is our update from our current round of updates. We're getting caught up. And so hopefully that should be tapering off as we're catching up on the older things that were missed. And then we do have 4 items that are on a first read to abolish. None of these are policies that we are just ditching. They've just been moved around a bit. Policy 2414 was actually updated in February 2011. This is programs for pupils at risk. Our policy vendor indicated that the relevant portion of this policy has been moved to policy 2428.1, and we just did a second read on that update last month. As a result of that move by our vendor, policy 2414 is only intended for high poverty and high need school districts as defined in the administrative code, and we don't meet that definition, so this policy should be abolished from our manual with the relevant portion moved to that other policy. Policy 5755 is a February 2024 update, Equity in Educational Programs and Services. Our policy vendor has addressed all of the relevant information from this policy in policy 2260 and policy 1523, which was just adopted as of last month. So as such, this policy is redundant, and we're putting it up for abolishment. Policy 7430 is a January 2021 recommendation to abolish. This is school safety. So all of the information from this policy is now been moved to either, let me see, 5 or 6 other policies, which I will take you through so you know we're not ditching school safety. Policy 2431, athletic competition. This has been up to date as of August 2021. Regulation 2431.1, emergency procedure for sports and other athletic activity. That one we are going to have on for first read next month. Policy 7432, eye protection, is up to date as of October 2021. 7420, hygienic management, is up to date as of August 2004. That sounds like an old policy, but generally the science around bloodborne pathogens and chemical hygiene, disposal of medical waste, things like that in the schools is not an area that has really changed over the years, so the standards have not changed. Policy 7440, school district security. That's an update from 2020, which we will be putting on for update next month. And policy 8420, emergency and crisis situations, will be up to date after approval of second read tonight. And then the fourth policy that is up for to be abolished is policy 9322. This is actually was put up to be abolished in February of 2005, drug-free school zones. This policy was replaced entirely by policy and regulation 9320, which is cooperation with law enforcement agencies. So that particular policy, 9320, is up to date as of June 2022, and the regulation for 9320 will be up to date after approval of second reading tonight. Did you get all that? Okay. We have second read. We have the 30 that we put up for first read last month. As I said, this is how we're getting caught up. So I'm going to go through them very quickly. We have bylaw 0141, board member number and term, bylaw 0163, quorum, policy 1140, educational equity policies, affirmative action, regulation 1240, evaluation of superintendent, policy 1530, equal employment opportunities, policy 1550, equal employment anti-discrimination practices, policy 2200, curriculum content, policy and regulation 2431.4, prevention and treatment of sports-related concussions and head injuries, regulation 2460.1, special education location identification and referral, policy and regulation 3160, physical education, policy 3211, code of ethics, teaching staff members, policy regulation 4160, physical examination, regulation 5200, attendance, policy 5337, service animals, policy 5350, pupil suicide prevention, policy 5570, sportsmanship, policy 5611, removal of pupils from the general education program for weapons, firearms offenses, policy 5841, secret societies, policy 5842, equal access of student organizations, regulation 6115.01, first adopt federal awards, funds, internal controls, allowability of costs. That's the first time it's going to be on our books after this second read. Regulation 7410, maintenance and repair. Policy 7610, vandalism. Policy 8420, emergency and crisis situations. Regulation 8420.2, emergency procedures. Regulation 8420.7, lockdown procedures, Regulation 8420.10, active shooter, Policy 8467, firearms and weapons, Policy 9181, volunteer athletic coach and co-curricular activities, advisors, assistants, Regulation 9320, cooperation with law enforcement agencies, and Policy 9323, notification of juvenile offender case disposition. So with all that, I would like to move numbers 1 through 3.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? That's a lot of policies. Wow. Okay, seeing no discussion, can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Bletfield?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reimer? Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to additional business. Do we have any other committee member liaison reports?
Yes, we do. We have one from the Racism, Equity, Diversity Committee. We are still working on student representative to the Board of Education, which will include a student representative and an alternate. The thinking in part that company might be good in an audience in a room full of adults and board members. So we're looking for 2 students. Mr. Brandt has been working on this and has some really good methods and connections with students in how to identify the process, which will include student council, officers, voting for students to serve. And we're looking probably for September board meeting to have a student representative. Thanks, Mr. Britt. So that will be exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And Rebecca covered all of our exciting bylaws and policies and equity. I know there was one question about a policy, the Strauss-Esme equity policy, and how it relates to our equity policy. And ours is just much more specific to Hunterdon Central, and was born out of community work and student work and faith-based organizations. So there are a lot of ways that it's different, and we feel really good about it. That's pretty much all I have for racism, equity, diversity.
Thank you. I have a quick question. What about the student rep? So how do you envision that working? Would they just come to the board meetings with us, or?
Well, of course, we have executive session, we have personnel matters, we have things that can't, students really, it's not appropriate.
Right.
But it is a law in New Jersey that we have to have this representation, and it's exciting. And I think that given how many students we have coming to board meetings and speaking up and speaking up for themselves, this will be a great place for them to do that and to stay connected to the board work.
No, I think that's great. I
Yeah.
think it'll be interesting to see how we actually involve the students, or if they give us updates, or if they're sharing, on different topics or whatever it might be. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other updates, communication?
Communications. So I'd like to thank Mrs. Smagala, Mr. Roberto, Ms. Morano, and Ms. Smith for all of their hard work on the updated website. It looks wonderful. If anyone,
Yes, that deserves a clap.
So much appreciated. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback and how easy it is to navigate. So again, thank you very much for that. We also talked about social media procedures for staff and students. And Mrs. Magala, again, is working with staff and athletic organizations and boosters to come up with some standard social media procedures, as well as make sure that everyone's aware of the policies we have in place in that space.
Okay, thank you. I can just do a quick share on JTC. As you can imagine, with September quickly approaching, we are spending at the business department, and the transportation department has been spending quite an absorbent amount of time working through the routes to ensure that all the kids can have a bus for September and be transported safely. Yes. Okay, anything else for committee groups? No, I think we're good. Okay. Additional board business? Let's see. So I would just like to echo what Ms. Splatfield said to you, Dr. Shadow. I wanted to say thank you so much for jumping in with both feet underwater to help us in a very big time of need. We appreciate you coming in to fill in as the interim superintendent for us, and it's only been a few months, but I've definitely enjoyed working with you, and I wish you all the best in your next retirement, retirement phase 2.
It's only been the third time.
Okay, retirement phase 3. So thank you very much.
No, it's been enjoyable. I thank the Board of Education for affording me the opportunity to work with so many wonderful publics, students, faculty members, board members. You've been very good. And I truly believe, moving forward, that you are in tremendous leadership, capable leadership, compassionate leadership, intelligent leadership hands with Miss Jessica Cangelosi. She's phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal. So thank you for my time here. It's been short, been about 5 months, but I earned every gray hair. It's been fun. It has.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other board business? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the residents forum for the general public comment. So if anybody's interested in speaking, if you can come up to the podium and you can write your name down on the clipboard, you'll have 5 minutes to speak. I'll set a timer, so at 4 minutes you'll hear a beep, and that tells you that basically you have about a minute to go. So you guys can come right up. And if you could just state your name and your township.
Sure. So my name is Rachel Ladd. I live in Holland Township, but I am currently employed as a Hunterdon Central bus driver. So I already introduced myself. My name is Rachel Ladd. I will be starting my 8th year as a Hunterdon Central bus driver. Let me start off by saying that I am proud to be a Hunterdon Central bus driver. Hunterdon Central Transportation has an outstanding reputation of safety and preparedness when it comes to transporting students. We also have a fantastic reputation when it comes to our training. In fact, the Bakers Basins branch of the MVC was so impressed with our training that they emailed the Director of Transportation singing our praises. We love our jobs and our students. We take our responsibility very seriously as we are transporting the most precious cargo of all, children. It is because of this that I'm standing before you tonight. As a mother of 2 children myself, one of whom is a former student at Flemington Raritan, I can say that I never once hesitated to put my children into the capable hands of Central Transportation. I had complete confidence in them as I believed that the safety of my children was their utmost priority. Standing here now, I can say that my confidence in transportation is the same, but my confidence in the Flemington Raritan School District to put safety first is wavering. As all of you are aware, Flemington Raritan is offering free transportation to all students enrolled in their preschool and pre-K program. To facilitate this, they are pushing to add as many car seats as possible to vans and buses. To have more than 3 car seats on a bus or van is not only extremely unsafe, it is reckless. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, there are 380 reportable bus fires each year, school bus fires. Excuse me. This averages out to 2 school buses catching on fire every school day. The National Fire Protection Agency has conducted surveys and studies to determine the cause of these fires. Nearly 70% of school bus fires are traced back to the engine, running gear, or tires, and 83% of those are from mechanical and electrical failures. So this means the majority of fires are not caused by collisions. School vans tend to transport students of varying abilities and often include our most vulnerable students. These students range from neurotypical to severely disabled. As a bus driver, the physical and emotional well-being of our students is on our mind constantly. We have an emergency evacuation plan in place before the beginning of the school year, and that plan changes and evolves as we get to know our students and their capabilities. We have students who are flight risks and require someone to hold their hand so they do not run away, students who are incapable of unbuckling their seatbelts or leaving their seats without assistance, students who are afraid of loud noises or changes in light, students who do not like being buckled or do not understand that they need to remain buckled and require buckle guards for their safety, which then require assistance to unbuckle. The list goes on and on. We have seatbelt cutters to quickly free students in the event of an emergency. We have taught our students where they are located, where the emergency exits are and how to use them, informed them that the windows can be kicked out, and what to do if the driver is incapacitated. We run evacuation drills twice a year to further equip our students and aides. We have planned and prepared and trained for every imaginable scenario. We have felt confident in our ability to get our students to safety in the event of an emergency until now. Adding an unsafe amount of car seats to our vehicles puts both our students and our drivers in a precarious situation. It requires 2 cuts to free a child from a car seat, one to free their upper body and the other to free their legs. So you cut 2 and the whole thing opens up. We can take them out. It takes as few as 3 minutes or less for a full-sized bus to be fully engulfed in flames. Our vans run on gasoline, which is more flammable than diesel, and the fuel tank is located in the middle of the van. If Flemington Raritan is successful in pushing through their agenda, it will put drivers in a position to not be able to get all the students safely off the bus. It is in your power to show that the safety of our children is your utmost priority. Our lives are in your hand. I have a stack of papers I'm about to hand you, and it states as follows. I am employed by the Joint Transportation Committee, comprised of the Boards of Education of Hunterdon Central Regional High School and Flemington Raritan Regional School District. I have been directed to select a route to drive the students of this commission for the upcoming 2024 to 25 school year. This includes preschool, pre-K students of the Flemington Raritan Regional School District. We are of the unanimous belief and opinion that this directive, so that there is only one driver on each bus who has responsibility for both driving and the responsibility for the well-being of the children, is patently unsafe. I am doing as instructed, as I do not want to be insubordinate despite the apparent lack of wisdom of this directive, and because I am aware that the NJEA will be demanding negotiations concerning the impact of all the safety aspects of this directive. Further, I am doing so because I have been advised that I am covered and protected under NJSA 18A 16-6, so that the boards of education are required to indemnify me and hold me harmless in the event of any harm or injury caused by this directive. This has been signed by all of the Hunterdon Central bus drivers. It was a unanimous decision, and we didn't come to it lightly. That being said, I just want it to be noted that we would die to be able to get all those students out. So it's not for, it's, you know, to be standing there and having to make a decision on whose life to save and whose to let go is a big decision. We really love our jobs. We love our students. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't fill this out. I'm sorry, I didn't fill this out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Head. Would anybody else like to speak?
Good evening. My name is Joanne Tangi. I've been at Hunterdon Central in transportation since 1992. I've been at it a few minutes. I am also the driver trainer since 1998. I've been driving special needs students along with wheelchairs for that whole time. My colleague pretty much covered a lot of it, but I just want to bring your attention to the 1988 bus crash. 27 souls were lost. They could not get out. They were hit by a drunk driver. The bus went up in flames. Federal and state regulations from that crash required that buses have roof hatches, emergency exit windows, kick-out windows. And along with other children losing their lives or being injured, child checkmates have come into place, seat belts, crossing arms, and external sensors. Now, our policies, because our safety is top, we go a little bit farther with some of the road regulations. no right on red, no backing up, 5 miles an hour under the posted speed limit, 5 miles an hour on school grounds, stay in the right lane, no passing, no left turn on state highways or roads without a traffic light. Now, I've mentioned I do wheelchairs, and they take a little time, just like it does with car seats. And I have actually had people get on my bus yelling and screaming at me that I'm taking too long. So now, from what I understand, there's going to be 196 car seats that we will be picking up. That increases the road rage. And we do know that there are little wackadoo people out there. And I just wanted to say that more than 3 car seats on a school bus is so unsafe. Like Rachel said, there is no way you can get all the students out. God forbid the bus is in flames or you're stalled on a railroad track and the train is coming. I think we should set the standard. I know there is no state law saying how many car seats should be on a school bus, but I think we should set the standard and say no more than 3 because it's the safety of the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Hurley. I am from Raritan Township, and I represent the Flemington-Raritan Board of Education. Had I known these comments were going to be made before me, I would have prepared something to provide a response. But I wanted to first start off by saying congratulations to both Dr. Shadow and to Ms. Cangelosi Haight on your new appointment. As president of the Flemington-Raritan Board of Education, I was here to address the recent motion made by your board to dissolve our joint transportation venture. I was disappointed to learn that a multi-million-dollar venture that has existed for nearly 30 years was ended with a walk-on motion with no notice given to the public. I urge you to reconsider this motion for several critical reasons that impact both of our districts and the communities that we serve. Our transportation collaboration has been a model of efficiency and fiscal responsibility benefiting our students, families, and taxpayers. The dissolution of this venture will come with 3 distinct consequences. Number 1, increased costs. To date, I have seen no evidence that dissolving this partnership will benefit either district financially. By separating our transportation systems, both districts will face higher operational costs. Sharing resources, personnel, and ancillary costs has allowed us to leverage economies of scale, leading to significant savings. Without this joint effort, we'll both incur greater expenses that will ultimately impact our budgets and reduce funds available for educational programs at a time when costs in education are rising rapidly. Number 2, operational inefficiencies. The integration of our transportation services has streamlined routes, optimized bus schedules, and allowed for bus drivers to have a more robust work schedule. If we're unable to reach a resolution to have our preschool students' transportation needs met as co-owners, we can logically assume that we would not be able to have them met if we move to a shared service model. As a result, we'll need to seek other transportation partnerships to meet our needs. Disbanding this jointure will have unintended consequences on the Hunterdon Central Bus Drivers Association, as it will significantly reduce the amount of routes and in turn limit the number of hours available to drivers. Number 3, the impact on our families. Our joint venture has provided consistent and reliable transportation for students across both districts for nearly 30 years. We were elected to represent the same constituents of Raritan Township and Flemington Borough. The potential disruption of this shared transportation will directly affect families of these townships. Our students leave our district, and many continue to yours. The families we serve are the same ones you will serve shortly. The collaboration between our districts has been a testament to our commitment to serving our communities with unity and efficiency. Please consider the impact that dissolving this venture could have on the students of our communities now and in the future. I respectfully request your board revisit this decision and vote to rescind the motion to dissolve. Ms. Bletfeld, Ms. Gong, Ms. Kellogg, Ms. O'Donnell, and Mr. Reimer all have the ability to make this motion. Together, we believe we've found a solution for this year's transportation that provides a safe transportation for all of our students. This model, if implemented, can be followed moving forward. Further, we request a JTC meeting be scheduled at the earliest opportunity. Should your board not elect to rescind the motion, the process of evaluating and separating assets will be arduous and needs to begin in the imminent future in order to meet the imposed deadline for dissolution of July 1st, 2025. Thank you for your consideration.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Birkenstock. I'm a resident of Raritan Township and a member of the Flemington Raritan School District Board of Education. I want to thank Ms. Hurley for your statement on behalf of our board, and I am here to speak for myself as a board member and also a resident of the community. I would like to reiterate Ms. Hurley's request to urge you to reconsider the decision to dissolve the joint transportation agreement. You have all been told that the current JTC structure is antiquated. However, I would argue is one that has been tested and has succeeded for over 30 years with little to no issue. The dissolution of the JTC will have a profound impact on both districts. This impact is not something that is immediately seen, but one that will become very evident very soon. Please make no mistake about it. This decision will result in additional monies being expended. It already has with legal fees and will only continue to build with various other expenses that we will both incur. I understand that your district has done a good job of building these reserves, so you may not be concerned, but please remember that we all represent our communities and are using taxpayer dollars. We have a fiscal responsibility to the people that elected us. There we go. That elected us to make the sound financial decisions that are based on facts and not emotion. At a time when schools across the state are struggling with difficult budget decisions, now is not the time to add uncertainty and further complications. Whether it be cuts to staff, programs, supplies, extracurriculars, or any other line item, the additional money that will be required to provide the legally obligated transportation to our students will have to come from somewhere. And as you're all very well aware, we are very limited in our ability to raise these funds. I've now been on the board for 8 months and have the opportunity to, as FRSD's chair of the JTC, to be involved in all transportation discussions. Have there been disagreements when it comes to preschool transportation? Absolutely. But there hasn't been one instance where I felt that it wasn't something that both sides couldn't work through. At the end of the day, we all recognize that the transportation of all of our students is paramount. We've had excellent lines of communication between both boards' committee members, and I would fully expect that to continue to thrive should you reconsider your decision. I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for your continued service to the community. This is something I believe is worth fighting for, and I'm committed to the success of this relationship. Thank you.
Nope, I was just wondering, I know everybody was kind of taking some time getting to the podium, so, okay. Any other comments? Are we good to close this out? Okay. All right. Thank you for all of those that have come out to speak. Now we will move into board comments. Any board comments?
I'd just like to say thank you, Dr. Shadow, for your service again to step in here. I know it was a lot of work, and we appreciate your willingness to join us for this time and to help us make it through what has been a very busy and crazy time.
I appreciate it. These are strange times in public education, and, you know, level-headed people coming together, doing good things for children always works. And I believe it, and even with the jointure thing, maybe there's hope.
And I would like to echo that. Thank you so much for your time with us and for navigating all of us and this board. I appreciate it, and your time here was really helpful to us, so thank you.
Thank you. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. This board has been excellent. Excellent. You do work together, you know, and you all have your own particular way of working together, but it's working. And I'm very proud of that. So thank you.
Good to hear. And I just wanted to also add, I wanted to thank so much for hearing from the bus drivers, for coming here tonight and sharing, what this experience is like for you, what it means to you, student safety, what you do to maintain and raise student safety to a higher level. Very grateful as a parent to hear about that. And just when you spoke about the extra precautions that Hunterdon Central bus drivers take, not turning right on red and going below the speed limit. And I was thinking, could you guys teach like a driver's ed class, for like my kids and stuff? Like that would be amazing. Really just appreciate, the work that you do so much. Having been on vacation with toddlers in car seats in the middle of the night, I can't imagine 7 kids on a bus surviving something. So I really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to echo, thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for your commitment to our kids, to your commitment to safety. And we are very lucky to have professionals like you that are as committed for to what you do and will take your time to come out, because I'm sure you're going to be up bright and early driving those routes and checking everything out in the morning. So again, thank you very much.
I'm going to pull Sandra Gong. Ditto. Thank you, guys. We really do appreciate all that you do and how serious you take the safety of our students that you're transporting. So thank you. All right. Okay, if there are no other board comments, we will now move into the nomination of candidates for the Delaware Township Board member. So I'll pass it over to you.
I would like to open the floor for a nomination to fill the vacant seat from Delaware Township Board of Education member through December 31st, 2024.
I'd like to nominate Jennifer Devine.
I'd like to second that nomination.
I'd like to nominate Jessica.
It's one nomination at a time, and then we vote.
Oh, is that how
I
it
thought we
goes?
did 2 nominations and then voted separately.
Okay. Oops, sorry. Before we vote, I just want to remind the board members that when you're casting your votes, our policy requires that we express our opinion in support of our vote. So before Ms. Stokes does roll call, is there any debate on the first nomination that we have?
I will go ahead. I really appreciated how you answered the questions, and I think I'm taking your comment, Sandra, but coming out and saying how important public education was really significant for me to hear, because it is, and that's why we're here, and we're here for kids. So that's why I'm in support of you. And both excellent candidates, and both really, really good people and qualified to be on the board. So thank you.
Okay.
I really liked your breadth of experience, which I felt would best round out the board. I particularly like your business experience, which includes global experience, your experience with education, your extensive experience with teamwork and collaboration. And I also felt that Ms. Devine would have the most time to commit to being a successful board member.
I'll elaborate on ditto this time. But I do agree with the comments that were made so far. I appreciate both candidates coming out. They're both excellent candidates, so thank you for that. I've learned a little bit about Delaware Township, how small it is, and I think listening to the experience of your kids in particular, Ms. Devine, was really quite interesting that they've really flourished and took advantage of what Central had to offer. But I do like the comment about public education, the fact that you have both not-for-profit as well as corporate experience, that teamwork is paramount to what you did in terms of being a toy developer. And so again, but thank you to both. But I will support Jen Devine in this particular case.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll do a roll call, and thank you for expressing your opinions. I think that we probably heard from three of the board members as they're voting, so they probably don't have to do it again unless they want to, right? Yeah. Okay. So can we have a roll call, please, on the first nomination?
Okay, so Mrs. Bletfield,
Yes, for the reasons I already stated.
Ms. Gong,
Yes, for the statements that I made.
Mrs. Kellogg,
I get to make more nice statements. So I'm voting yes. And again, thank you both for coming in today. It's wonderful to see that Delaware Township has such passionate and folks willing to come out. I personally am supporting Ms. Devine because of her educational experience. I had the opportunity to serve on the board with Rob Richard and Jeff Charney, and having someone who understands education and understands child development on the board was a huge help to me as a board member. So that's why I'm supporting you.
Mrs. O'Donnell,
Yes, and for reasons that I stated.
Mrs. Peterson,
I want to thank you both. Running a campaign is awful enough, and to also come out and put yourself up to do this interview process, I cannot thank you enough both for coming out. Unfortunately, my vote is no.
Mr. Reimer,
Yeah, I agree with Becky. I like the skill set that the other candidate brought, although both of you are really good candidates. I think the strengths that the other candidate will bring will plug in and be of better use to us in going into the next year, especially with Lori leaving the board. So for that reason, I vote no.
Mrs. Santangelo,
Thank you both for your time. I appreciate it. My vote is going to be no.
and Mrs. Duggan.
So I also appreciate meeting both of you. I think you're both terrific people. Thank you for coming out, but my vote is no.
So we're going to reopen the floor for nomination to fill the vacant seat for Delaware Township through December 31st, 2024.
I'm going to mess up your last name, and I'm sorry. I'd like to nominate Jessica Rothel. Rothel.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. Mrs. Bletfield?
No, really, for the reasons I already stated why I was supporting Ms. Devine, but I do think you're a strong candidate as well.
Mrs. Gong?
Again, I appreciate your coming out. You've done an awful lot for the school and Delaware Township, but my vote is no.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Again, thank you for coming out. I do appreciate everything you've done for Delaware Township, but my personal concern is with everything else that's on your plate, that it's going to be difficult to commit to being a board member, so my vote is no.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
You're both absolutely as qualified to sit on this board as any of us up here, so thank you for being here tonight. And unfortunately, my vote is no, because I already voted, but thank you for coming.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes, the reason that I leaned more towards your candidacy is because of the financial background and honestly just the extensive commitment to the community, which I think is just really helpful. I really appreciated hearing from both of you, but yes.
Mr. Reimer?
I vote yes. Similar to Becky's reasons, your financial background is outstanding. And again, I think we're going to have a really good need for that and your managerial skills. The fact that you're an alumni of the high school, as well as having so many children within the district and having gone through and going through currently, I think is going to be really intimate knowledge of what we need for the students. So for that reason, I vote yes.
Mrs. Santangelo?
So I agree with the other statements. I also think having 6 children, you know how to manage your time, and they are entrenched in this school district. And so your involvement is impressive, along with your 26 years at Princeton University working in finance. I think is going to be a much needed and added value. And I also don't think we can make a judgment on whether you can handle the commitment, because you've already stated you can. And again, I think asking a busy person to do more things, we know it's going to get done. So I have all the confidence in that. So my vote is yes.
And Mrs. Duggan?
So for me, the thing that stood out the most is your volunteerism and your community experience. I mean, your resume just goes on and on about how you're getting involved. And again, yes, you have 6 children. Thank you for all that you're doing. So to me, just being able to step up and be a volunteer just because you want to and you want to get involved is, I think that goes a long way. And then, of course, you have a very strong financial acumen and background, and I think that would be really important for the board as well. So I vote yes.
Okay. So, tied, do you want to?
Yeah, so it's a tie vote. So our policy says that in an event no candidate receives a majority vote of the remaining board members, another election process shall be conducted between the 2 candidates receiving the highest number of votes. Since we only have 2 candidates, we will do a second vote on each. So I think we don't necessarily have to express our reasons again. We can say for the same reasons that we just said. And then I guess if you can run another roll call, we'll try one more time, because our policy says we have to.
Okay. So to appoint for the vacant seat for Delaware Township through December 31st, 2024 for Jennifer Devine. Mrs. Bletfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Gong?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Donnell?
Still yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Reimer?
No.
Mrs. Santangelo?
No.
Mrs. Duggan?
No.
Okay. Motion to appoint for the open vacant seat for Delaware Township through December 31st, 2024 for Jessica Rothau. Roll call, we'll do Mrs. Bletfield,
No.
Mrs. Gong,
No.
Mrs. Kellogg,
No.
Mrs. O'Donnell,
No.
Mrs. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Reimer,
Yes.
Mrs. Santangelo,
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan.
Yes, for the same reasons as before.
Okay, so we have no majority, tie.
Okay. So now we've tied 2 rounds on the voting. So if we don't agree on the candidate by October 5th, the county superintendent will have to appoint someone. We have one more meeting before then to attempt another vote. So while I'd like to resolve this tonight, we do have other business to complete. Given this, can I get an informal show of hands on if anybody wants to do another round of voting? Okay. So then, since we don't want to keep doing this, I'm going to suggest that we move on and try again next month. All right. So moving on to the election of board president.
Okay. So we're going to open the floor for the nomination of board president.
I'd like to nominate Susan Duggan.
You don't have to do seconds.
No.
I'd like to nominate Lori Bloodfeld.
Any additional nominations? Okay, then at this time, there are ballots in your folder. If you could take that ballot out, write your choice, sign that, and we will collect those ballots to read.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not reading these in any particular order. Vote for board president, Mrs. Rebecca Peterson votes for Sue Duggan. Miss Sandra Gong votes for Mrs. Lori Blutfield. Mrs. O'Donnell votes for Lori Blutfield. Mrs. Santangelo votes for Sue Duggan. Mrs. Kellogg votes for Lori Blutfield. Miss Lori Blutfield votes for Lori Blutfield. Jeremy Reimer votes for Sue Duggan. And Sue Duggan votes for Sue Duggan. So we are at 4-4. There is a tie and no majority. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to open the floor to nominations for a board president.
I would again like to nominate Susan Duggan.
And I would again like to nominate Lori Bloodfeld.
Okay, then I'm going to ask that you take out your ballots again. Please write who you've selected and sign your name. I'll come around and collect them. Okay, these are the votes. Ms. Sandra Gong votes for Ms. Lori Bletfield. Ms. Noelle O'Donnell votes for Ms. Lori Bletfield. Ms. Lori Bletfield votes for Mrs. Lori Bletfield. Mrs. Kellogg votes for Lori Bletfield. Mrs. Rebecca Peterson votes for Sue Duggan. Mrs. Santangelo votes for Sue Duggan. Mr. Jerry Reimer votes for Sue Duggan. And Mrs. Sue Duggan votes for Sue Duggan. So at this point, there again is no majority.
Okay, so I'd like to make a recommendation at this point, if we're not able to come out of a tie, that we consult with legal on the next steps and refer this to the county superintendent for a decision. Okay, before we move into executive session, I just have one thing to note to the board. We talked briefly about having to do a retreat and getting some dates together in September. So in the interest of, still acting as the vice president, acting president, I'll send out an email to the group to start getting some dates of availability for your weekends, preferably Saturday mornings in September, unless you guys want to try to do it during the weekday. We could do a weekday, weeknight.
I would just suggest, though, I need to find out more about a transition meeting that HYA had offered to do. It's part of what we paid them for. That might be part of it, but they can help with like goal setting, and I think that would probably be the most important thing.
Okay.
To focus on. So we might want to, I don't know if we need to do something separate or combine or just focus on. I'll find out more about exactly what they do.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if it's something that we can combine and that makes sense, maybe we should just try to do that in the interest of time. All right, good idea. So then we'll talk and then we can send out a note. Okay, great. All right. So next we'll be moving into executive session to talk about some litigation, negotiations, and some student matters. And there will be no action after executive session. So can I have a motion to convene into executive session? Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much.